Hello, and welcome back again to Archaeology 101. In today's topic, we'll be looking at what has been described as the oldest murder case in prehistory, a case that's so old it even predates Homo sapiens. Our crime scene takes place within the Atapuerca Mountains of northern Spain. Within the mountains is a cave called Sima de los Huesos, the English translation being Pit of Bones. Archaeological investigations carried out in this cave discovered a 43-foot drop down a vertical shaft. At the base of the shaft comes a slope which leads to a dead end. Archaeological investigations within this dead end identified around 28 early Neanderthal individuals. These were all deposited at different times, but are within the same geological sequence, so the space between each individual being deposited was not very long. Further investigations of these skeletons revealed one particularly interesting individual. This individual became to be known as Cranium 17. It's a young adult of unknown sex and an early Neanderthal. Only the skull has been preserved. The jaw and the rest of the postcranial skeleton has not yet been identified from the skeletal assemblage. The skull, besides being fractured into 52 pieces, is otherwise very well preserved. In 2015, an article released in the journal PLOS ONE by Dr. Sala and her research team caused a media frenzy. They identified on Cranium 17 perimortem fractures to its skull, perimortem meaning around the time of death. These fractures seem to be blunt force trauma, which penetrated the bone-brain barrier, which would have been fatal. These were two separate impacts, likely caused by the same object, at different angles. Their deduction, therefore, was that this impact could not have been caused by the deposition of the body into the shaft, but would have to have been caused prior to its deposition. Their diagnosis? Murder. The murderer would likely have been right-handed considering where the blows to the face were, which is not very unusual as most hominins are right-handed. In the PLOS ONE article, the authors do not go into discussing the murder weapon itself. However, in a follow-up interview for Archaeology and History Online, Dr. Salas suggested that in her opinion, the murder weapons could have included a wooden spear, a stone spear tip, or a stone hand axe. It's quite intriguing that she mentions a wooden spear. If you've seen my previous video on Stone Age hunting technology, you might remember the Clacton-on-Sea spear tip. This was dated to 400,000 years ago, only 30,000 years after the Cranium 17 individual was dated to. If Cranium 17 was truly murdered, this has some implications on human behavior as a whole. Cranium 17's murder predates the evolution of Homo sapiens in Africa by about 130,000 years at today's estimates. Therefore, homicide would seem to be an unfortunate and inherent part of human behavior, not purely endemic to Homo sapiens ourselves. Although Cranium 17 is very old, it's probably not the oldest case of murder. It's simply the oldest case known for murder. The whole site of Sima de los Huesos is very unusual. Why 28 humans ended up at the bottom of this cave shaft is still unknown. There have been numerous suggestions, from caching of the dead by other humans as some crude way of burial, to simply being that the humans were killed prior by animals and dragged in by their predators or by other scavengers, and their body parts just accumulated at the bottom of this shaft. What is clear is that there is a great deal of work to be done on this site in the coming years, which will hopefully further elucidate why these people ended up here. In archaeology, we always seem to lose the context behind the death of an individual. Even in extreme cases where cannibalism is seen, you can never be certain whether that individual was killed for the purposes of being eaten by its fellow humans or had already died, whether that was due to starvation or illness, and then that individual was then consumed to either save its fellows from starvation or was perhaps part of a grieving process, which we can't really see in the archaeological record. In the example of Cranium 17, not everyone is convinced that this individual was murdered. Charles Engeland and his team, for example, actually claim, using machine learning, that this individual was brought into the cave by animal means and was perhaps brought there because an animal scavenged the bones, rather than it being an example of interpersonal violence. I'm not sure if I completely believe this, as there are 28 individuals in this cave, and I can't see 28 individuals all being brought in by animals. I think there is something odd going on here, and I think Cranium 17 is probably the weirdest example and does show probably examples of interpersonal violence, rather than it simply being the case a bear dragged him in. Let's wrap this case up. The evidence put forward by Dr. Sala and her research team seemed to point to the first known case of murder. Although not all researchers are convinced, the evidence is quite compelling, and it has implications on human behavior as a whole, and it demonstrates that homicide is not endemic to Homo sapiens, and in fact, murder would appear to predate us by at least 100,000 years. The Sima de los Huesos site is incredibly unusual, and why all the 28 individuals ended up there, we don't really know. But what we can definitively say is that there's much more to come from this site in future. If you're still here, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this presentation. I really enjoyed making this video. It's a little different to the ones that I normally make. I think I will cover a similar topic in future, as these prehistoric murder cases are quite exciting and thrilling, and I hope you will be there to watch those as well. As always, please look at the links to the figures and the bibliography, as those are all the things that I've used to research and illustrate this video. Thank you again, and I'll see you hopefully next time on Archaeology 101. Bye guys.